Horrifying crimes. I mean, I suspect, like you agree that the perpetrator's name should disappear and the victims are who we should always consider. But I wonder if we start on the story. Is it time to ban Andrew Tate from social media?
I don't think anything is served by having this guy on social media. It's not the first time we've heard about how people are watching him and taking away his messages. I don't think in itself he is necessarily can take full responsibility for these horrific murders. This murderer was premeditated. This was about control. As we've seen so often, sometimes, sadly, some men who have breakups with wives, with partners, wanting to take their vengeance in the most horrific way. But just to say, there's another poll that's come out around young people born between 97 and 2012 who are part of that generation who've grown up influenced by social media. And it's really interesting, Rob, that a poll has shown that most of them, I think it's 4 out of 5, believe actually there should be curbs on access to social media for young people because they've been affected by it. So I think this story continues, doesn't it? But hate that is spewed out by people on social media that adds to people's anger is something that is just so harming. And we see that in what we've heard this week about what this man was watching and listening.
Just to be clear, so people understand, the prosecutor wanted to put this before the jury in the trial, and the judge...
The fact that he'd watched
Right,
the video.
that he'd watched these videos. The judge, Mr Justice Ben Nathan, I know all the people involved, said, look, you can't do that because it's more prejudicial than probative. In other words... he probably watched a bunch of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the thing that necessarily caused the murder.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Caroline's point. We've got to take this in the round. It's not just about any individual. I think on the policy, though, in terms of your question about banning any individual on social media, this is going to be, I think, a big test for the legislation that's come through on online safety, particularly for the UK, and perhaps even for the EU, where there are other laws that are similar to this. And are these going to be, these horrific crimes, are they going to prompt Ofcom or any other regulator to think about how they are going to police some of the narrative that's out there on social media? Now, that is not an easy question because you'll get a backlash against censorship, about free speech, and it's important that you calibrate these things. But this is about hate, and this is about the result of that. And so I think the authorities absolutely need to take this seriously. And even though the judge has separated that in the trial, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be considering it more generally about what people have access to.
There's an Ipsos UK survey which happened to be commissioned by the Metro, also revealed on the front page of their paper this morning, that 1 in 4 people, so 1 in 4 men and women in the whole country, 1 in 4 knows a female victim of violence. And they're saying it's now an epidemic. And just as that judgment verdict was being passed yesterday, around the same time, Jess Phillips stood up in the House of Commons and began to read out the names of victims. The first time she's done so, of course, in government. This is something she's campaigned on for a long time in opposition. I mean, she read out 10 names. We showed them there. In total, she read out 95 names. It's terrifying, isn't it? So maybe just banning someone like Andrew Tate isn't the answer. Maybe because, let's be honest, he's obviously finding a market. He's got a huge amount of views. You have to ask, why do people want to watch him? There's a whole big debate to be had. But ultimately, in the meantime, 1 in 4 people know someone who's a woman or a girl who's been a victim of sexual violence,
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds us. And I know there are some people who think, commentators, media talk this up and, it's not about blaming men per se as a sex, because there's a lot of men out there who do not commit violence, who what I would call are good examples of men. They can be kind, they be caring, and when it comes to relationships, they do not see them as a form of control. And violence, it's about a form of control so often. But it is still something that overwhelmingly is part of women's lives. as victims of domestic violence, of other forms of violence, but also just as a woman, often being wary about the situations you put yourselves in where you might be exposed to it. And that's something you sort of think about, you know, whatever age you are as a woman, it's something you think about a lot. And we've got to find a better way to engage this. And, yeah, trying to stop people like Andrew Tate is possibly one aspect of this, but the other side of it is, what more can we do to actually create a positive environment for which boys become men, in which they see what being a good man is all about and what a healthy relationship should be about, and what respect is all about.
Caroline.
Sorry.
No, please continue. I thought you'd finished. So tomorrow's International Women's Day. I mean, it is so depressing, isn't it? That for both of us, for you as well, Rob, for everybody, that this is the conversation we're having ahead of that day. That many people are terrified or, you know, abuse survivors, violent abuse survivors.
Yeah, it is sad, but it's important that we're having that conversation and that we are marking it with having that meaningful discussion about things that are really impacting vulnerable women and girls. And the tragedy of this is that women are still, therefore, vulnerable by definition because they can have violence against them. And in some countries, in some cultures, you still have this idea that women are somehow lesser. We still have to battle against that. But it's not just a question of social media. You're right, it's a cultural one. I have a son. You know, there'll be questions about how I have to think about raising my son. Politically, there is a difficulty because people talk about a crisis of masculinity and giving rise to what you call toxic masculinity.
Right, but this is the question. You know, I have friends, godchildren. The truth of the matter is, my friends who have got grown-up sons, teenage boys, they'll tell you privately, these are professional women, that they are horrified that some of their sons watch Andrew Tate, they listen to him, he's popular with young men. That has to be considered, and real questions have to be asked as to why. Who's he speaking to? Why does he speak to them? What's going on? That's one thing. The other thing is, how do we speak to men to persuade them that, frankly, this is a real, as we might say, experience of women? I was thinking about this the other day. I was on holiday with my friend and got into an Uber and other services are available, and I fell asleep. And I woke up and she said, "What on earth are you doing?" And I woke up and she said, "Well, I would never do that in the back of a taxi." In other words, trying to explain to dads and brothers out there, right, and sons, that the lives of women in cities and other places are different based on how they feel in terms of their safety, right?
No, exactly. And, you know, it's when you know, because the evidence is there, that both boys and girls, through social media, are exposed to examples of what I would call, for the best, early this morning, unhealthy relationships and what that means. It's just warping what their sense of themselves should be. And, I mean, and that's why it's very interesting that young people who are part of that generation of children who've been brought up with social media are saying they wouldn't want that for their kids. So we've got to do something about that. But more, I think, is about how do we understand better why some men, young and older men, are attracted to watching these videos? What is going on there? Because we have to understand that in terms of sort of trying to influence these young men and older men, why this is not right, why this is wrong, why this isn't the sort of masculinity that actually a man should be proud of.
Do you feel, when you were both worked in the Home Office in different ways, while your respective governments were in power, what do you feel concrete was done to protect women and girls, particularly? We know that men are also victims of violence. I'm sure we'll get lots of messages this morning. People were saying, you know, it's not just women, but we are talking about women at this point. What do you feel was done under your time, or what do you feel wasn't being done?
If I'm perfectly honest, I don't think I could point to anything concrete. And the reason is that it is so difficult to try and get a sense of what are the actual, you know, policy or regulations or legislations that you can put in. The online safety work started under my former boss's tenure at the Home Office, and that is part and parcel of that bigger story that we need to tell and that bigger issue that we need to tackle. But it goes beyond, I think, what government can do. It is about, culturally, what are we saying to young people, but what are we saying to ourselves about what is really the issue here? Is it that there are people out there who still feel that ownership of women belongs to them and belongs to men, and that women should behave in a certain way and fulfil certain obligations? Or is it that as a society we are progressing, and even though we are in a bad situation, it is not as bad as it was maybe 10 years ago, and it's getting better? And if things are getting better, what lessons are we learning from that? Is it the way that we talk about it, you know, on TV today? Is it the way that we teach our girls and our boys about respect? I don't think there is one simple answer, and I don't think that there is anybody that can point to one thing that they've done in government that says this is what tackled it.
I just want to come back to the question about Andrew Tate, because he is really popular, right, amongst young men especially. And what he does is present a lifestyle which some people might take the view is disgusting and odious, but there are, as ever, grains of things that he talks about.
He fills a vacuum.
Right,
many
personal
boys,
responsibility, getting up, working out, etc., being an alpha man that seems to have emerged in response to what he says, and perhaps it's true, I don't know, that men have felt for a long time that they've been in retreat. That, in other words, they've been called toxic, that masculinity itself is bad, and that Andrew Tate has filled that vacuum with what some people would call poison. To what extent do we need to answer that with better men out there responding to what he says? I mean, it is a shocking thing that you can have an account on social media when you're facing counts in this country of rape and human trafficking, right?
There's Sam Fender, who's a musician, said something recently. He's up from the northeast about how do you talk to young men who often are presented as being sort of privileged, white working class men, privileged, not that they're responsible entirely for violence in our society, but he was trying to point to the fact that often the language we use often makes it out that somehow men have it all and their lives are great. And a lot of men, it isn't. And we have to find a better way to talk to those young men and those people who feel that somehow they're emasculated and they, are responsible for everything that's awful in the world. Let's be clear. Not all men are out there doing what we're talking about this morning.
But it must be confusing.
We need to make sure we have a language that says, there's a better way to be a man. And actually being a man isn't about controlling those around you and hurting them.
But it is confusing. If you're a young man growing up today, you've got these mixed messages, you've got this idea that somehow you've done everything wrong, or that, you're the problem or you're the source of it. And then you have people like Andrew Tate and other influencers who are saying, actually, you need to claim back your masculinity. And that does sound quite appealing. And it's not as if talking about feminism or the women's movement is about taking something away from men. It's just about that parity. So maybe there is a question about the way that we talk about equality that doesn't have to denigrate other people.
Yeah, it's well, Labour have said that they have pledged, haven't they, Caroline, to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. Do you feel that's going to happen? What do you see is going to take that forward?
Well, I think, it's really hard to put a time limit, if you like, or set some targets when we're talking about culture, about, changing people's perspectives on how they behave and what they see as their, their role as a man.
Do you not feel they can do that, then?
Well, I think, trying to make sure that they are publicly behind, but they have to prove that they're going to, how they're going to do it, how they're going to make sure that there's early intervention when a woman raises concerns about violence. How are the police going to respond? Are they going to answer that call? Are they going to arrive in time? We've talked about that on the programme in recent times, where sometimes in the control rooms they haven't had the empathy that they deserve. But importantly, changing the mindsets of young people and older people who feel that somehow this is the way to behave. That's a tough order in terms of trying to do that within a decade.
Right. And presumably tougher sentencing. When I was practising after Christmas, as you know, domestic violence, especially murder, goes up. And even that word, domestic violence, is a problem. Not least because the truth of the matter is that when you killed your partner, often the recommended sentence would be less than if you killed a stranger. Now, on that note, when it comes to sentencing, as you'll be aware, the Sentencing Guidelines Council, those are the people, so people understand, who are independent of government, that tell judges what they should do when they are confronting a guilty person or after a trial, have issued guidance saying that your ethnicity, your sexuality and whether you're a transgender person should be taken into consideration. It turns out that our Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, was rather taken unaware, and she is furious about it. Do you think that somebody's ethnic status or anything else like that should be taken into consideration to reduce someone's sentence?
No. I think there are plenty of things that should be talked about in the sort of pre-sentencing report. We have mental health, for example, domestic violence, where perhaps a woman has defended herself in a situation. But I think going down the lines, and I agree with the Shabana on this, is going down the lines by suggesting that somehow if you've committed a violent crime like we've been talking about, and somehow your ethnicity, or if you're of a minority faith, or of your gender identity, should play into a mitigating circumstance. I don't get that.
It was shocking to see that this emerged, according to the Times, from research that was carried out in 2017 by David Lammy. So it comes as something of a surprise that Shabana Mahmood was taken unaware that this was going to be considered by the Sentencing Guidelines Council. Just to be clear, what would happen, and these are rules that judges have to follow, otherwise they can be appealed, would be to say, look, you're a person of an ethnic minority or you're transgender, therefore I take that into consideration. Same crime of somebody who isn't a member of that minority, you get less time in prison.
Would that be the automatic thing, or do you think that's our interpretation of it? I mean, in the review, David Lammy says that he just wanted judges to be equipped with more information about the offender's background. But, sorry,
no, it's part of, it would be considered as part of the mitigating
and it's
circumstances.
I think it's a minefield, because then you're having to...
Everybody has a reason.
Judges having to interpret, well, how much of that should I take on board? How should that play in? When David Lammy, I think, was writing, I think the report, he was commissioned by the Conservative government, I think, to write something into this area. He was pointing to some matters around young people from poor backgrounds where they're surrounded by crime, organised gangs and groups, being influenced, in particular, and he focused on in London, in particular, certain, areas of London, and where young black boys were, that was part. We talk about gang culture all the time.
Aren't you into a murky mess that everybody will feel they had a reason to commit the crime?
Yeah, that's like a get-out-of-jail free
card. That's motivation, isn't it?
It sounds like an excuse, doesn't it? It sounds like an excuse because, ultimately, everybody has challenges, everybody has trials in life. But
everybody has choices. And everybody will have an argument why they made that choice, won't they? And then you're weighting up different moral perspectives.
But the whole point of a trial, presumably, and for it to go in front of a judge, is so that if it's a jury or if it's just a judge, they are looking at those mitigations, they're understanding it. It's for the lawyers to make that case, to present it. It's not for, I don't think, for sentencing guidelines, because what this makes me worry about is the politicisation of the judiciary. And it's saying that you've got to take a political view of what's happening. Now, I don't say that David Lammy's intentions weren't good trying to mitigate against the problem, but this is the law of unintended consequences.
OK. Shall we have a quick word? We've actually got Stephen Kinnock, Care Minister under, the Health Department, a bit later in the programme. There's a couple of health stories around. One interesting, only 5% of women surveyed think that the government is treating women's health as a priority. And secondly, the thing that Stephen Kinnock wants to talk about is this new programme that's being rolled out for supervised toothbrushing for 3 to 5-year-olds in early year settings. So teachers in nursery and in lower primary education will be helping kids to learn how to brush their teeth. Nanny state gone crazy or absolutely necessary?
I have quite strong views on this because... I worry. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we had somebody on the programme that was talking about teachers having to help potty train their children. And, it was pretty stressful because we've all had to do it. We have to have that battle with our children. I mean, I do every night, you know, trying to get that toothbrush in and working out how you're going to get their teeth clean. It doesn't feel like this is a teacher's responsibility. It doesn't feel like this should be the responsibility of other people. It should be the responsibility of the parents. And I understand, you know, there's a whole thing about children's teeth rotting and people having to go to A&E, and it's a really terrible situation. But parents need to take responsibility for their children. I'm sorry.
But they're not. I mean...
So where they aren't, that's sometimes where we have to step in. But I mean, first of all, I think when you introduce these schemes, it should be seen as something to complement the work you do with the parents. So, you know, when a woman is pregnant, sort of through the sort of midwives and then the health visitors afterwards, school nurses have a really important role to play in this. There should be more school nurses in schools, I feel. So it's about where this complements. We cannot ignore the fact that there are children under 5 who are literally having their milk teeth taken out because they are rotten. But it has to be a question of where the state can do something, but the responsibilities of parents are really
We've actually got a Twitter
this.
poll on this.
Yeah, we really want to hear from what people think, don't we?
Get in touch. We'd love to hear what you think. Should teachers teach children how to brush their teeth? Let us know. Get in touch on Facebook, Twitter, or email.